Well, I grew up in Seattle, and when I was young, I wasn't really around a lot of music. My parents would play the radio in the car. They were really into country music. And I know that they went to a few concerts. They went to a Homer and Jethro concert, I can remember specifically. When I got to be in fourth grade, I took the Suzuki violin method during the summertime between fourth and fifth grade. And I was really enjoying the music. And I went into the fifth grade band the next year. And a few months into it, my dad noticed that I didn't seem to be as enthused about the music as I had been in the summertime. And he goes, "What seems to be the problem?" And I go, "Well, it's those other violin players next to me. They sound terrible. They're out of tune. It hurts my ears." And he goes, well, what do you want to do? Would you like to play a different instrument? And I go, yeah, I want to play one of those long black things. I don't even think I called it a clarinet at the time. And I think it was about 60 days later, my dad came home late from work, and I was already in bed, and he came and woke me up, and he handed me a clarinet. And because I was 3 or 4 months behind the rest of the students in learning a new instrument, I decided to go for private lessons, and my parents encouraged me to do that so I could catch up. And I really loved the clarinet, and I ended up taking private lessons for the next couple of years. And in the summertime, I would go to summer music projects that would last for 3 hours long. And you do music theory, you would play, and I was invited in the fifth grade to stay another 3 hours and hang out with the junior high students and do the same thing over again. By the time I was in 7th grade, it was pretty much figured out that I was going to go to college on music scholarships, and I had a tunnel vision of what you could do in music at that time. So I was either going to be a music teacher or I was going to play in a symphony. And I didn't really listen to the radio growing up around me. Sometimes there would be a jukebox at school in the lunchroom, and I'd hear some songs and stuff. But I was really into the outdoors too. So when I wasn't practicing, which I've spent hours every day when I got home from school practicing the instrument, I was out in the outdoors. It wasn't out of the ordinary for me to just say, "Mom, I'm going to walk 10 miles that direction, and I'm going to walk 10 miles back." Or, "Mom, could you pick me up 10 miles in that direction because I only have X amount of time to do the walking." And then when I turned 16, my dad asked me if I was going to get a car. And I go, "No, I think I'll get a motorcycle." And I hadn't ridden a motorcycle before. So I got a motorcycle, rode it around the yard, went and took my test. And 9 months later, after living in the Northwest in the rain, snow, sleet, hail, I decided that it might be a better idea to have a car. So I got a car, and that car changed my life because it had a radio in it. And I started listening to the radio all the time. And it just literally changed my life. 3 months later, right after my 17th birthday, I saw my first concert, which was Leon Russell and the Shelter People at the Memorial Coliseum in Portland. And The opening act was a band called Singer, and the woman that was playing drums in that band inspired me to go buy a drum set. And then seeing Leon Russell out there, it was like a religious experience to me. I mean, here was this guy banging on the piano with, I think he had a 10, 11-piece band at the time, backup singers, everything. And then he would get up on his piano with a guitar and start playing guitar, and I go, wow, this is the greatest. 2 weeks later, I went and applied for a job in a record store. And they gave me the job even though I didn't have any music knowledge. And I was quite honest up front that I didn't, but I was very enthusiastic about it. And that was a life-changing experience right there. I was a senior in high school, just starting my senior year. I owned a few records that I got at my dad's company picnic, and 2 albums that I had bought based on a friend of mine playing a couple of records that his older brother had, which were Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Those were the first 2 albums I'd ever bought. I was really knocked out by the band's musical variety of things that they could do in song. I go, oh, you can do this stuff? It just took me out of my shell of being in this little box of, reading my music and playing what the band director said you needed to do. And that year I made up for lost time, and I ended up buying like 665 albums. I lived at home. I could take a bag lunch to work. All I had to pay for was gas and the occasional concert, and the rest of the money went to buying records. About 3 weeks into working in the record store was a store at Jansen Beach Mall, which just opened up the week after I started. And I started going out with a girl that was in the store, and one night she says, I got a surprise for you. And I was thinking something completely different, but she took me over to Music Millennium, and I looked around, and half the store was domestic releases and half the store was imports. And I was just fascinated with all these imports. We didn't carry imports in our store. And there was all this other music that I'd never seen. And about 3 or 4 days a week, our store closed at 9 o'clock. 15 minutes later, I could be at Music Millennium, and they stayed open till 10. I started going over to Millennium, reading album covers back to back. And a lot of those records that I bought were from just reading covers and looking at covers and going, oh, I know that producer, I know those artists. From another record I got, I'm going to take a chance on that. And Millennium became my record store to go shop at other than my own. And Portland had an amazing array of record stores. We probably had the best record stores in the 70s than any city in the United States. And everybody was competing with each other to try to be a better record store. So you had to go shopping at all the record stores to see what everybody had. It was some really incredible times. And the record industry was doing really well. A lot of the people that went to work for the labels and distributors, they came from the record stores. They were the music junkies, and they were running the record industry. Unlike today, where we have a lot of bean counters running the record industry, and the music is very secondary to them. They could be selling widgets of any kind. They just need to figure out how many widgets can we sell to make this kind of money, And so I graduated from high school, that summer, that company sent me up to Seattle to their flagship store. I worked there for 5 months, and then they asked me if I wanted to go to Hawaii. And in both cases, I was the assistant manager of the store. In fact, there's a good little story that in January of 1973, when I was graduating from high school, my school counselor brought me in and said, "Terry, you're not going to get these scholarships unless you get your paperwork in." And I go, "I'm 17 years old, making $2.25 an hour, and now I'm an assistant manager of a record store. It doesn't get any better than that." And I mean, here I am, 47 years later, still doing the same thing. And, it was all a fluke from getting a car with a radio that got me to that point. So then I got shipped to Hawaii to be assistant manager. And then after a year, they sent me to Everett, Washington to manage my first store. And then back to Portland a year later when I was 20. And I worked for them all the way up to 84. And they decided to close down some stores and sell the rest of the stores off. And I went to work for the new company that bought them, Tape Town. And after about 5 months, I went up and told the people at Tape Town, it goes, "I know you guys treat me really well, but I can't really work for you." They didn't care about the music. They cared about selling home stereos and car stereos. And they looked at music as add-on items to the sale. I would go talk to them and go, "Our inventory doesn't look right. We don't have the right things in here. We need to get some of this, this, and this." And they just turn around and go, "Oh, you got plenty of those over there." They didn't really care about the music. So I gave them 2 months notice and said, "I don't know what I'm going to do next. And this is the only store you have down in the Portland area, so you got to find somebody to come take my place." And they agreed upon all that. And then 2 weeks later, I got a call from somebody from RCA Distribution who said, "You know Don McLeod?" And I go, "The guy that used to own Music Millennium?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "He's coming back. He's going to take Millennium over." And Don and his wife, Lorene, along with Danny and Patty Lissy, started Music Millennium in 1969. And they sold it in 1979. Don went up to Amboy, Washington. He had 100 acres up there, built a fairy tale cottage, put in a fish pond, planted chestnut trees. And he'd been away from the business from 79 to 84. And he had financed the sale. And when the middle ownership told him that they were going to file bankruptcy, but they were going to pay him his last 2 payments before they filed bankruptcy, he didn't want to see his baby go. So he decided to assume $500,000 in debt and what was left from the company and inventory and the building on 32nd East Burnside and go forward. So I went over to talk to him. I had set up an interview to apply for the job, and I sat there for about an hour and he never did come interview me. I went looking for him around the building and he said, "Well, I already know who I'm going to have as store manager. If you want to leave your application at the front counter, we've got clerk jobs." So I figured nothing's really going to come of this, so I went away. And about 2 weeks later, he called me back up and said, "Are you interested in the job still?" And I go, "Yeah, I would be." And I ended up getting hired, and we spent the next 3 years paying off the debt. And they had expanded, the middle ownership had expanded the stores to 4 locations. And we immediately shut down 2 locations. It was going to be hard enough to try to keep 2 locations going because there was no money. And we had this big debt with the industry, and paying them back was going to be a little bit difficult. But it was pretty good times for us in the record industry right then. There was a lot of great bands out, Talking Heads, I mean, it was 84, so there was a lot of the artists that were doing well in the 70s, like the Ramones and people like Gordon Lightfoot, the Grateful Dead. They were all still selling really, really well. And there was all these new bands, new wave bands that were happening that invigorated business in the record stores in the 80s in a good way. When we got to 1989, it was going to be the 20th anniversary of Music Millennium. And we were out of debt. Things were going pretty well. And I was looking for something to do for the 20th anniversary. And I turned to Don McLeod and I go, why don't we do 20 straight days of live music in the store? And he goes, well, where are you going to do it? And we had done music in the store. We had artists play in the aisles, but we didn't have a permanent sound system or anything. And I pointed up at the mezzanine in the store, and I go, why don't we do it up there? And he goes, that could work. So we looked into renting a sound system for 20 days to do these 20 live acts, and decided to buy a sound system because it wasn't going to cost us all that much more. And we figured maybe once in a while, some artist coming through town might want to stop at the store and play for the staff, maybe play for the existing customers that are in the store. And when it was all said and done, I reached out to the local community to try to get this live music for the anniversary. We ended up with 40 straight days of live music. And when that got done, I just started getting on a telephone and calling record labels. I'd see artists coming through town, and I go, hey, any chance they'd like to stop by the store and play a little set? We've got this PA system, they can meet some customers, they can sign some records, it could be a good thing for both of us. And I just kept calling, and we started doing about 150 live performances a year. And then we had a second location over on Northwest 23rd in Portland, and we expanded that location into the back of the building. And we built it with live music in mind. And we started moving the live music over there, and we were doing over 300 performances a year in that store. Most Saturdays had a live set at 1, 3, and 5. And one of those was normally a nationally known act. One was a touring artist that might have been new to the area or had a small following. And one would be a local artist. One thing in particular that we always tried to support both their music in any way that we could was local artists. And we had a really good-sized local artist section, but now that we had this stage, it gave an opportunity for artists to come perform in the store. Many artists performed there before they played any clubs in town because they couldn't get a gig in town. Some artists over the years did their record release parties at our store. Artists like Elliott Smith, the Decemberists, Laura Veers. I mean, I could go on. There's just been literally thousands and thousands of local artists that have played the store. And one of those local end stores that I remember very, very well was a quadriplegic cartoonist named John Callahan. And he was a regular at our Northwest 23rd store. And I would go over to the store multiple times a week. And I always run into John. John used to like to just hang out in the store, listen to the music on the overhead, talk to customers. And he goes, "Hey, Terry, I'm going to put out a CD." And I go, "I know you are. I was talking with Terry Robb, who's going to work with you on that." And he goes, "You know, I'd really like to have my record release party here." And I go, "Man, that would just be incredible." So we had probably about 150 people at the store for the event. A lot of people from the Northwest neighborhood that knew John because he was just a regular fixture over there. And a certain amount of people that came out to see Terry Robb, who played along with him. And that album, Purple Winos in the Rain, was just one of those very special records that, you know, you have somebody like John who, you know, is a quadriplegic, but he also had a lot of optimism in his life, which made him very successful with his cartooning as well as with his music. Some of the end stores that I really remember that we've done over the years, a jazz pianist named Mal Waldron, who was about 76 years old at the time. He was the last pianist to play with Billie Holiday when she was alive. And we didn't have a large crowd there, but we had regular customers in the store at the same time. And when he started playing, everybody just kind of stopped in their tracks wherever they were in the store and they listened. It just was captivating in that way. And before he started up on stage, one of my employees tapped me on the shoulder and goes, "Hey, Terry, that guy up there, he's smoking a cigarette." I go, "Well, he's 76 years old. I'm just going to let it go and let him smoke his cigarette, you know." But he was a great guy to talk to, too, because he had an incredible amount of stories from all the different people that he had played with over the years, including a local jazz bass player, David Friesen, which he'd played with on and off over the years. They even made a record together. The Elliott Smith in-store was very, very special. You know, it was always great to see a local artist that went on to do really well. You know, we always supported those artists, but it was, you know, not everybody that is talented gets to have that kind of career where, you know, people all around the world know your music. And that's a pretty special thing. Yeah, the record industry's changed a lot. I started seeing a lot of changes in the industry. Early 90s, there was a lot of big box retailers across the United States that decided to get into recorded music and DVD. The reason that they liked recorded music and DVD is there was a release date every week. And so they could put music and DVDs in their Sunday circulars that were coming out on Tuesday to bring people into their store. And they knew just putting them in the paper wasn't going to bring the people into the store. They decided to have price wars between each other and sell recorded music under cost. They figured if they get the people in their store, they could buy diapers, computers, housewares, clothing, you name it. So they weren't looking at music and DVDs as a profitable item. They were looking at it as this is the driver to bring them in the store to sell them all this other stuff. Well, in a lot of marketplaces, Circuit Cities and Best Buys were having big price wars, and it was putting independent stores out of business because they couldn't compete with it, and people would go into their stores and go, how come this CD is $14.99 when I can get it over at Best Buy for $8.99? You guys are ripping me off. Well, what the customer didn't know is that, this store was paying $11 for this CD and just trying to make a reasonable amount of profit on the CD. So, this will take me into this thing that happened. The record industry came up with some policies that said, if you're a record store selling used CDs, we're not going to support you with advertising or marketing money. And that was in 1993. At that time, we weren't selling that much used CDs. It was maybe 5 to 10% of our business at the max. But it was the principle of the whole thing of our suppliers telling us what we could and could not do with our business. So I typed out a 3-page letter and mailed it to about 125 different record industry executives at labels and distribution companies, as well as the trade publications in our industry, talking about the unfairness. All the music publications from our industry, Cashbox, Billboard Magazine, Album Network, they all ran stories on this. And it escalated to where it was Terry against the record industry. And this was in January of '93, and there was stories on a consistent basis in these magazines, and there was other record distributors that started following suits to where there was 4 major record distributors that adopted these policies. And it got to be the end of June, and a friend of mine at the Album Network publication called me up one day and goes, "Hey Terry, Garth Brooks just had a press conference and he stated he didn't want his new album sold in stores that sold used CDs. He felt that songwriters should get paid again if the CD was sold again." Well, within 10 minutes, we pulled out all our Garth Brooks VHS tapes, records, CDs, and wrote them up for return. That was on a Wednesday. The next day, I bought an ad in the Willamette Week newspaper, invited the public to come down the following Friday and bring all their Garth Brooks posters, CDs, DVDs, whatever they had, down to the parking lot, and we were going to barbecue them. And we went out and got barbecue. I got a chef hat. I wrote a press release and sent it all to the local media. Within that week, every single media, radio, TV, newspaper, had either come by the store to talk to me or had called. And when we did the barbecue out in the back parking lot, every TV station showed up. It looked like there might have been a presidential debate going on or something, but it was just us fighting the industry. Forbes magazine sent out a photographer to do a story on it. And that night I ended up doing a talk show in Seattle on a radio station. And one of my employees, Fred Siegmuller, said, "You're getting really popular. I'm going to have to be your manager." And I go, "No, you're going on the road with me." He goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "We're taking the barbecue on the road." And over the next 2 weeks, we called record stores from the Canadian border down to San Diego along I-5, and we set up a tour called the Barbecue for Retail Freedom. We got magnetic signs for the side of our van that had that on there. We made tour shirts with Burning Garth Brooks CDs on the front and had all the tour dates down the back of the shirt. This city and what record store it was, all the way down. And we did this tour. We sent out press releases, about 150 press releases to anybody from Rolling Stone magazine to the New York Times to the Country Music TV channel. And we got followed on this tour by a great number of these publications and media. And we would try to get the record store to set up promotions wherever we went. One of the record stores set up interviews back and forth between the country channels and the rock channels on the radio station. Some had street parties down there, but we tried to get them to get their media down there. I kind of figured that if I could get this to the public and tell the public what was going on, they might be sympathetic to support us enough that we might be able to get sanctions overruled. When we were in Berkeley, 5 o'clock news, TV stations were down, and I would take like a VHS tape, barbecue it on the grill, put it on a hoagie, put barbecue sauce on it, take bites of it for the camera, and it looked really good on camera. So me and Fred, we went to the San Francisco Giants baseball game that night with our barbecue hats on and our aprons on, and it was like half the people at the game had seen us on the 5 o'clock news, and they were all just, it was like a rah, rah, rah wherever we went. We had some artists follow us on the road. Our last stop was at Rockaway Records in LA, and Dave Alvin from the Blasters came out to see us at the barbecue. And I think it was like the week later, People Magazine did a full page on us. Along the way, the Country Music Network was calling us on the road. They weren't quite understanding exactly what we were doing, but they were keeping track of us. And when I got back, Good Morning America called, and they wanted me to come out to New York to talk about it. And it happened to be the day after all the sanctions were lifted by all the distributors, and we had actually won. Out of that came an idea the next year for me, because I'd met all these independent retailers in other cities. And in your own town, you don't share your trade secrets with your competitors. People aren't really that open with that kind of stuff. But in other cities, it doesn't really affect you that much. So I go, wouldn't it be great to put a group together of independent record stores in non-competitive cities that would share ideas on the successful things that they do in their store? And I put a whole letter together. I was at an industry convention called NARM, and I met with Mark Cope from the Album Network, and I go, hey, this is my idea. What do you think? And he goes, oh, this is great. So the next year, he helped me get a bunch of stores together, and because they called record stores on a regular basis to get their top sellers for the week. And we all converged into San Francisco and met to see if we had common ground to put an organization together. And out of it came the Coalition of Independent Music Stores. And very quickly, we became known as the darlings of the record industry. Up to that time, the record industry put all their attention into probably their top 10 or 12 accounts. So the Tower Records of the world, the large one-stops of the world. And so a lot of independent stores never got any attention, any phone calls or anything from the labels or distributors. I was a little bit different because I was really proactive, and I, from an early age, I was so excited about the music. I was calling people at the record labels going, oh man, I can't wait to hear this record you got. Or, oh man, I got this record by you. This is so good. What can we do to try to make things happen with this thing? And so we put together a program called the Adopt a Band program, and we went to the industry and sold them on a promotion idea. They spend some money to support these stores, and we all worked these records together. And in the beginning, we just did one record a month. One of those early records was by an artist named Ben Harper. And at that time, nobody knew Ben Harper. But I heard the record, and it was just incredible. And so we started working the Ben Harper record. And the 4 weeks that we worked it on the Billboard chart, each one of those weeks, it first went onto the Billboard chart. The next week it jumped up a little more, and it jumped up a little more. And, it helped Ben establish himself as an artist that was worthy out there. And we did that with so many different artists. I was talking to John Schofield this last year, great jazz guitar player. He was playing the PDX Jazz Festival, and he had made this record with Medeski Martin and Wood. I called up the record label and I go, hey, we have to do this record. This record is amazing. And he goes, yeah, I'll support you with whatever we can get you, And the next day, I got a call from Don Van Cleve at the Coalition office, and he goes, Terry, what are you thinking about? Our guys can't sell jazz records. I go, what do you mean? I go, they could sell jazz records. He goes, not all of them. Some of them are just rock stores. And I go, have you heard the record? So I got the label to overnight him a copy of the record. And he goes, I see what you mean. This is a great record. And when I was talking to John at the PDX Jazz Festival, he goes, my career went from this plateau up to this plateau in 1 month because of what you guys did with that record. And I was able to get better gigs. I was able to be taken seriously by the record industry for the first time in my life. And that was really satisfying to hear. Out of the coalition, we ended up with 75 stores in our coalition. And it turned out tons and tons of stores wanted to be in the coalition. But we wanted to kind of keep it to a number that we could monitor, because we wanted to talk to these stores on a regular basis. And we get too many stores, we weren't going to be able to do that. And we wanted to make sure all these stores were working these records like they were supposed to. And so there was a number of stores that were turned down, small chains, that had like 8 to 12 stores. They didn't really fit in with our onesie twosie kind of stores. And so another coalition popped up. It was called the Music Monitor Network. And then a third coalition popped up called AIMS. And it was mostly for real indie rock stores. That takes us up to 2007. My stores were probably 55 to 60% indie product. And there was quite a few record stores at that time. In the year 2000, there was 7,500 record stores in America. It gave an indie label a really good opportunity to try to sell product because there was that many stores. But at the end of the 90s, things changed because Napster came along. And, over the next 7 years, record stores went from that 7,500 number down to 1,800, which mean all those indie labels had a lot less places to sell their music. And we started seeing a lot of those indie labels go down because of it. There was still an industry out there, but, take a blues label like Alligator Records. In the 90s, Bruce Iglar, who owned the label, made a statement to me that said, I can put out about any record on Alligator and put the Alligator logo on it, and I'm going to sell 10,000 records. Well, indie labels can make good money with 10,000 records. Major labels look at that as failure because they have a business model that requires so much more money to go into each one of their projects. But an indie label could make good money on that. I had my own indie label called Burnside Records. And, we would sell at least 3,000 in most cases. And we even had, a few records that sold 5,000, 10,000. And I could break even and make money in that situation. But then as the industry started to fall apart because of Napster, I couldn't sell those kind of numbers anymore. And most of my records were selling 2,000 to 3,000, and it just didn't work out financially for me. So in the ultimate end, I ended up selling my record labels because I was starting to lose money on a regular basis on my labels. And I didn't have that many places to sell records to. And that made it really, really tough. So in 2007, the industry doesn't look good to me at all. It doesn't look good to anybody. Most of the independent record stores that were left were still there because they were passionate and they were putting a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into trying to keep their business going. They had to make a lot of changes. A lot of record stores started adding other merchandise into their store. Lifestyle items, as they would call them. Not that record stores didn't have these things in the past, because most record stores had t-shirts and posters and incense and different things like that, but they really had to look at that as a profitability area in order for them to sell music. And 2007 looked pretty grim, and at that point the three coalitions got together from an idea that Chris Brown from Bull Moose Records had in one of the coalitions. He says, we should do something like the comic book industry does. They have a comic book day every year, and we should do something like that. So the three coalitions got together, went to the industry and said, hey, would you give us some compelling content on vinyl that we can sell on a special day? Because nobody cared about vinyl at that time as far as any other big box retailers, none of them cared about vinyl, and let alone, the public at that time. There wasn't that many people into vinyl. I think at that time, new vinyl sales were less than 1/4% of the industry sales. And the only vinyl you could get was from indie rock labels like the Sub Pop labels out there that were still putting out some vinyl. And so we talked them into making 50 records for this special day. It was the third Saturday in April, and we hired a publicist, and he sent out a press release to the industry that did two things. One, it talked about this special day that we were having, but really it was more about going, hey, we know the media has been painting the picture that record stores are going away. Well, hey, there's 1,800 of us still out here in America, and hey, there's records in a record store. And a lot of people didn't realize that. And we had a good crowd come out on that first record store day. And every record store day since then has continued to grow. Physical goods today aren't like they were back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, since digital music and streaming has taken over. Physical music is about 10% of the industry's business these days. But out of that, vinyl sales has just eclipsed CDs as the number one physical goods that's out there right now. There's even cassette sales these days. That's a configuration where a small amount of people out there have been cheerleading it on, and there's a certain amount of, especially indie labels out there, and I will say Sub Pop, love that Sub Pop label. Besides the fact they're in our backyard up in Seattle, they get it. They understand music fans, and they make stuff for music fans, and that's one thing we don't see very often from the major labels. We're seeing it a little bit more now that they've discovered the success of Record Store Day, and not only do you see special releases coming out on Record Store Day, you're starting to see some special releases on vinyl come out every month of the year. A lot of it's colored vinyl. Some records may come out, 5, 6, 7 different colors. The new Paul McCartney record came out last week, and you could go to his website and get one color. You could come to the indie record stores and get another color. And there was a couple other places you could get other colors. And, for fans, they love that kind of stuff. One of the things why Napster was so successful and why digital music was so successful is there was a certain undercurrent at that time that CD prices were too expensive. A lot of labels were selling their new product at $19, $20. So when you could get your music for free, hey, let's revolt against the industry and let's embrace this format here. Even though it doesn't sound as good, it's free. And so digital music did take off in a big, big way. And you can never turn back that pendulum. But there's a lot of young people especially that grew up on digital music and streaming that have discovered the wonderful sound and experience of listening to vinyl. The sound quality is the best of any format that was ever invented. It's better than the CD in most cases. It was definitely better than the cassette and the reel-to-reel and the 8-track tape. It has this nice warm sound. I think it's probably the closest thing that you can get to that experience of being at a great live show with a great sound system. And people go home, they experience vinyl in more of an art form than any of the other configurations that music has come out in. They take it out of the sleeve. They know they have to be really careful with it when they put it on the turntable, or they could get scratches and different things on it. In many cases, they'll go sit on the chair or couch in front of their stereo, and they're listening to the record, and they're looking at the album cover, and they're looking at the liner notes, and they're looking at the credits on the record. I know when I first got into music, I did that all the time. And I knew the engineers, I knew the producers. You looked at the guest people that were on it. It gave you some kind of really association with it all. And vinyl being 20 minutes a side or less, I think that 20-minute period is the amount of time that you can get a person to focus on something. When they were able to put 75 minutes of music on a CD, maybe the 5th, 6th song in, stereo's still going. Oh, I'm going to run to the restroom. I'm going to run to the refrigerator, get something to drink. I'm going to do this. Next thing you know, they're not in that experience with that music like they are when they're just sitting right in front of the stereo listening. And the artwork. Oh, I can't tell you how many records I bought in my life because the album cover jumped off the shelf, went into my hands. I looked at it and I go, yeah, I think I gotta have this. It may have just been for the art on the cover. It might have been that the art on the cover got me to look at the back and see, who's on this record and who produced this record. A lot of records have gatefold sleeves that you can open up and, read a lot more in there, maybe even have the lyrics to some of the songs in there. So the vinyl experience is a great experience. And I don't think we're going to see it fall to the wayside at all. However, the big record companies of the world kind of control the destiny of what happens with physical music, because with it only being 10% of their business, we're at the bottom of priorities. They've found out ways to cut costs down on physical goods, anywhere from hiring third-party warehouses to distribute their stuff that don't do it very well and don't get it to the stores on time. I can actually get product from England quicker than I can get it from Warner Brothers Music in Indiana right now. And that doesn't make any sense. We hope they'll continue to make physical goods. But they really control that. Like I said, though, a great deal of my business is with independent labels. And I think because of what the majors are doing right now, it's given a lot of independent labels a lot more opportunities to shine out there and to actually do decent business out there. I mean, a lot of those independent labels, they're making a lot of money off the streaming and digital sales. But I can tell you a lot of them, what they care about the most is the physical goods. Well, I do all the buying for the store, and part of it's a crapshoot. Sometimes you're believing the hype sheets, and sometimes you're reading through it going, no, this isn't the next Led Zeppelin, this isn't the next Nirvana, this isn't the next big thing. One of the things that changed in the industry, they had A&R people that used to go to the clubs, see the bands, and go, wow, that band just blew me away. I want to sign that band. Now they're going to the internet, they're going to YouTube. They're going, oh, look at this band. They're kind of cool. And they have 5 million views. We should take a look at them. They got a fan base right there. They are signing bands that already have fan base from the internet. And then they're putting it out there and trying to take it to even another higher level. But it's still possible for labels to come to independent stores to try to break records. It's not as easy because there's not as many independent stores. Where there was only 1,800 record stores in 2007, there are a lot more record stores now. There might be 2,500 or better. Not all of them focus on new product. A lot of them their focus is on used product because it has a higher profitability than new product. But we're finding more of those used stores just due to the demand of their customers walking in and going, hey, you got the new such and such, getting into new vinyl again. And so it's kind of revitalizing the industry on that side, and which is a big help to mostly the independent labels too. When I came to Music Millennium in '84, my job was to try to bring it back to life. When Don McLeod, the original owner, died in 1996, he had already kind of retired from the business and went out to his farm. But I looked at myself as I was the person that needed to carry Music Millennium into the future, and that in order for that to happen, and my vision was ever since I went to Millennium in '84, that I wanted people to have that feel and experience that I had when I walked into Music Millennium the very first time. And it had to be well curated. The things that matter to the customers out there when they walk in the store is the inventory, the employees, and just the vibe that they get within the store. And the employees alone, along with that inventory, can create that vibe. I want you to be able to walk into the store and see things that you don't know about and discover new things. I want you to hear things on the overhead in the store that you go, what's that? I got to go ask somebody what that record is. I want you to be able to come in the store and go to the Elvis Costello section and be able to find most of the Elvis Costello CDs or records that are available out there. At the same time, when you're over by Elvis Costello, you might see this brand new band that you've never seen before and go, that's a cool looking album cover, and you pick it up, and the next thing you know, whether you buy it or not, the artist's name is in your head. And maybe later on, you cross that artist because you hear a YouTube video, you see him on the late night TV show, you see that they're playing down at the Aladdin Theater, and maybe you should go check it out. Those kind of things are great. Today we have a computerized inventory, but when my staff knew the most about my inventory was when I sent them out with a physical catalog and said, you got to count all the Warner Brothers records in the store, or you got to count all the Capitol records in the store. You got to go through the bins. Because as you're going through the bins, you see everything else that's in the store, and it makes you aware of those things. So you know where those things are. Well, I'm pretty optimistic that I can continue to have a record store for years to come. Middle 90s, that wasn't so much the case. I can remember walking out in front of my building and looking at it from across the street one day and going, well, if this isn't a record store, maybe it could be a restaurant pub, and it could still be Music Millennium, and people come in and reminisce about, records and CDs and 8-tracks and you name it. I don't feel like that today. I feel that there is a place for physical goods out there, and especially for vinyl. And I think there's enough passionate people out there that want to see that happen. There'll be new record labels that are started because of that. There are people working at record labels right now, especially on the independent side, that want to make sure that there's physical goods out there. There's already, I'm on a couple of national committees and things right now to try to preserve physical goods. And one is the Physical Business Action Committee, which I formed through a trade organization called Music Biz. And, we've met with artist management because we kept going to labels and going, hey, how come you're not making physical goods on this? You're putting it out digitally, you're not making physical goods. They would blame it a lot on the artist managers. So we started going and talking to the artist managers and found out, that wasn't the case and all that. But we've tried to encourage a lot of artist managers to make sure they put physical components out there. You take somebody like Chance the Rapper. He's huge out there. Never had a physical piece of good that was in a record store. But people come in and ask for it. And, they should make those things to take care of their fan base, when their fans come into record stores. We're starting to see a lot more just vinyl-only releases come out. So, CD customers are feeling left out. And there's still a CD market out there, and they still want to buy new music. And I will go out there fighting for the CD, as long as I possibly can. I was fighting for the cassette when the cassette was going away. We had a lot of customers that cared about the cassette, and we would have continued to sell. It would have been, 10-15% of our business possibly, had it not gone away. I mean, when vinyl went away, the record industry shoved it out the door. In about 1986, CD had been out for 4 years. A lot of the chain stores and shopping centers and stuff weren't carrying CDs. And the record industry was coming in and going, you got to carry the CD. They go, we only have room for 2 formats. We got cassette and we got vinyl. And the industry pretty much told them, it goes, the CD's here to stay, vinyl's going away. So what happened was there was a mass exodus in these national chain stores, and they sent all their vinyl back and brought in CDs into their stores because they didn't want to have a larger space in the mall in order to have 3 configurations. And so all of a sudden you saw vinyl plumage just like this. And then it got to a point where my vinyl customers would go and look for new releases, new Bonnie Raitt on vinyl. Sorry, no. Not this artist isn't Egypt. And eventually they had to succumb to getting a CD player. And then when new releases, for the most part, at the end of the 80s, went away on vinyl, people started getting rid of their record collections. It was the record industry that just kind of shoved that out the door. There's a lot of people today, they regret that they got rid of their vinyl collections back then. And they're back building vinyl collections again. Because they went back to listening to their vinyl. Grandparents and parents all of a sudden became cool because they had an old stereo in the basement, a record player, and some records. And their kids and grandkids were discovering them in the basement and going, oh, you got vinyl. I started seeing grandparents and their grandkids coming in the store and shopping together. I started seeing parents and their kids shopping in the store together. That didn't really happen in a lot of decades previous to that. What's interesting today is a lot of those, teens and 20-year-olds, they're buying a lot of the classic music from the past right now. Our number 1 selling piece on vinyl, Fleetwood Mac Rumors. They're buying, Grateful Dead records, AC/DC records, Pink Floyd records, and they're going home and they can enjoy them with their parents. Now, in 1972, I wasn't buying records that were 40, 50 years old, and either were my friends. I mean, once in a while I would buy like a Joe Benuti record from the 30s or a Duke Ellington record or stuff like that, but it wasn't commonplace for people my age to buy records like that. And now you do have kids that are buying what their parents and their grandparents bought and enjoying it. Well, keep Portland weird. For about 3 years, I was trying to come up with some kind of campaign to support local business in the city of Portland. And I had planned on spending my own money to run little ads in the newspaper to support places like Cinema 21, Powell's Books, the Cadillac Cafe, you name it. That was in the late 80s. I couldn't come up with the right slogan or anything. And then Napster came along. We just weren't making the money that we were making before, and I couldn't afford to do a campaign like that. And then one day, I was talking to my friend who owns a record store in Austin, Texas, John Kuntz from Waterloo Records. And he goes, somebody came up with this slogan down here called Keep Austin Weird. And I go, wow. And he goes, but there's like 5 different people that claim that they came up with this slogan. And so every time I talked to John, which was on a pretty weekly basis, I go, what's going on with that Keep Portland Weird slogan, Did they ever figure that out? And I think it was about 2 or 3 months later, I was asking him about it, and he goes, you seem to be so interested in this thing, you should just go do it yourself. And I go, that's what I wanted to know, that's what I want to do. Because I was trying to come up with something that said, keep Portland unique. But I just didn't like that sound to that. But keep Portland weird makes so much sense. And it's open to interpretation. So I went and made 500 bumper stickers that said, keep Portland weird. And I hired a guy that had worked for Music Millennium in the past, back in 1969 when Music Millennium first was opening. And he was a store artist. And I had him hand draw the Keep Portland Weird. And then I made 500 bumper stickers that said, keep Portland weird, support local business. And I put the stickers out. I actually bought a couple ads in the Willamette Week that just had the sticker in there. And it didn't say Music Millennium. It didn't say anything about it. It was just the sticker inside the paper. And then I went to a lot of local businesses and I sent them a sticker that said, keep Portland weird, support local business, and told them what I was trying to do. I said, Portland is unique and we got a lot of great things going on here, and it would just be kind of neat that if everybody kind of banded together in some way, I'll send you stickers, you sell them in your store, Not a lot of the stores really got into it in the beginning, but there was places like Cinema 21, the 12th Fret Guitar Shop, just thought it was really cool and started doing it. And I had a really good friend, Lisa Lapine, the promotion queen. And she goes, Terry, what are you doing with this Keep Portland Weird? Because I had talked to her about it. She goes, let's have lunch. So we went down the street had lunch at Esparza's, a great Tex-Mex restaurant that's no longer here in town. And we talked about it. She goes, you want to put a marketing program together? You want to do this? You want to do that? And I go, Lisa, I just want to see this thing go out organically, and let's see what happens. The great thing about Keep Portland Weird is it's open to interpretation. You say keep Portland unique, it kind of tells you what it's all about. But weird means a lot of different things to a lot of people. And, in its early years, there was a certain amount of people that took weird to be a negative thing. And we would hear from people on that. But, weird is what you interpret it as. Going down to Saturday market, seeing the guy that's painted all in silver, seeing the naked bicycle race in our town, going up to Alberta and seeing the double-decker bicycles, driving on the streets. There's a lot of things that are unique about Portland. And the one thing I noticed when I went into a lot of cities traveling for industry events was you got dropped at an airport and then you had to drive usually from suburbs into the city, and you wouldn't know where you were in any of those cities until you got into the downtown core and you got into the unique, interesting local businesses that really create that vibe that makes a city. And, with all the big box retailers that were trying to move into Portland, I thought, this was an essential thing to try to do. I had no idea that it would germinate into the size that it is now, where it's actually kind of an unofficial slogan of the city these days. But it makes me smile that it does. I think you really experienced it about 20 years ago, where a lot of people started moving into the town from other places. Portland was always an affordable place to live in the 70s and 80s especially. And, people started gravitating here from places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, where the rents and cost of living were escalating quite a bit. We found a lot of musicians moving to town from being on tour and passing through Portland and seeing how great a city it was, how friendly it was, and affordable at the same time. And so a lot of musicians started moving to town. And then Portland really got on the map as a musical community when, people like the Danny Warhols, the Decemberists, the Elliott Smiths started making it, and people started paying attention to what was going on in the Portland music scene here. And then we started seeing a lot of tourism. And people came to Portland not just for the music. It was a beautiful city, and people were writing about it. And Portland had a great restaurant scene going on. And people found that going to Portland was a great place to have a vacation, because you had a variety of things that you could do here, and at the same time, you were close to the ocean, you were close to the mountains. You could make those daytime getaways. And the next thing you know, when Portland really started, we just started getting into a lot of national press and international press, and people started gravitating towards here. Portlandia even had something to do with it for it to continue to grow. But 20 years ago, you could still go in places in Portland and feel like it was old Portland. And I mean, I heard somebody last year say, well, now I have to go up to Alberta to feel like I'm in old Portland. There's not too many places that you can get that old Portland vibe anymore. I mean, in the 70s, you know, over in Northwest Portland, you could get one of those Victorian houses and 6 of your friends and pay, you know, $200 a month at the most, you know, and have a 4,000 square foot house for you guys all share in living. You know, there's this guy, Warren Pash, who's a musician here. He moved away for a while and went to Nashville. When he left, I think it was like 15 years ago, his apartment rented for $600 a month. When he came back to look into moving into Portland, he went over to that neighborhood looking for a place to rent. Happened to be his old place was for rent. And he went in there and they wanted $1,900 a month. And that pretty much tells you the story. You want to know about the homelessness in our town? People can't afford to live in Portland like they used to be able to. You know, we're getting up there with the big cities like the San Franciscos and Los Angeles as far as cost of living costs. One thing I've always been interested in this city is our music community. And whenever there's been, whether it's been a music festival or an organization, I've wanted to get involved to see that go into fruition so they're successful. I've been involved with the Cascade Blues Association since 1987, since when it first started. I'm involved with the PDX Jazz Festival. I'm a committee chairman for the programming committee. I've been involved with Music Fest Northwest. We were actually the anchor for the very first North by Northwest. And then in the right around 2000, this guy named Buck Munger, who had a music publication in town called Two Louis, him and a couple people had started an organization called the Oregon Music Coalition. And what they wanted to see was legacy artists recognized for what they had done in the state of Oregon. They wanted to see like an Oregon Music Hall of Fame where people got inducted and different things. And Buck would call me on a frequent basis for about 3 years to try to get me to start such organization. Well, at that time, I was on 3 or 4 different boards. I go, Buck, I don't have time to do this. I can't do this. I like the idea, but I can't do this. And then one day I got a weak moment. And I said, Buck, I'm going to do this, but I want another element involved in this organization. I wanted to not only recognize the legacy artists, but I want to be able to promote the artists that are happening right now. And I want to put an educational spin to it all. So I started this group called the Oregon Music Hall of Fame. And our goal is to promote and preserve the musical arts of the state of Oregon. Most of our effort throughout the year goes to putting music in the schools programs, and we give away partial scholarships, music scholarships for kids that are going on from high school to a higher learning to continue their music. And the idea started in 2003, and the Oregon Music Hall of Fame actually started in 2004. We do an award ceremony every year now and recognize those legacy artists. We have a small little museum over in West Lynn, and they've been gracious enough to give us some space in there. It has an interactive kiosk that has all the inductees in the Oregon Music Hall of Fame, has some music from each of those artists, as well as tells a little history of those artists. Back in 2003 and 2004, long-term goal was to have a museum / educational facility. And here we are 17 years later, that's the closest that we have to it right now. But it's one of the greatest feelings to go through like scholarship applications every year from around the whole state. It's not just Portland. And, be able to award some kid that lives in LeGrand whose music is his passion. There was a girl that we gave a scholarship to early on named Kate Davis, and she was a jazz player, and she went on to New York to one of the music schools over there, and right now I've seen her name on backup records as a backup singer and as a backup player. She's got a new album that's going to come out in January. I mean, it's exciting to see those kind of things happen and help somebody that where music is their passion, maybe give them the opportunity to go and experience music and enjoy music like I did when I was a child, and I got the opportunity to work in a record store, and here I am. Well, I can remember one of the first records I bought when I worked in a record store was the first solo album by Roger McGuinn, and Roger had been in the Byrds, and the Byrds had made a lot of great records. And one day, there was a local one-stop where we could get records here in town, and they were like a small distributor, and they carried stuff from all the different labels, and they were going to have Roger play in their warehouse at lunchtime. And so I went home, and I'm deciding what records am I going to bring with me. I'm going to go over and I'm going to meet Roger McGuinn today. And I ended up with a small little box of solo records and Byrds records. I go, I just got to do this. I got to take them with me. So I'm working at my desk up in the office, and I have a window in my office that looks out into the rest of the office. And I have this telephone system. We've never had voicemail in the office. And so, like, if I was on the telephone, before the computer especially, the phone rang all the time. And I could be on the phone, and somebody out there could put a yellow Post-it on my window that says, such and such is on line 3 for you. And I could decide, can I get off this call and take it? Or should they take a message? And so they buzz me back. The receptionist buzzes me, and I'm at my desk working, and I pick up the phone, and I'm not looking up at the window. And she says, "There's a Roger McGuinn to see you." And I look up at the window and I'm going, oh my word, oh my word. I had all these things that I was going to ask him when I went over to the warehouse when he was going to be over there, but he was there. And I go send him back, and he comes into my office, and I kind of felt like I was slobbering out of the corner of my mouth. I didn't know what to say. I just said, "I really like your music." And then I talked to him for a couple of minutes, and he signed my records. I ended up going over to that warehouse, and he performed in the warehouse with a 12-string Rickenbach guitar. We have done 4,500 or better live performances in the store. And all these people are just people to me. And they're just people. But at that moment in my office, I was starstruck. And it was like one of the greatest moments of my life. I got to meet a guy that made music that really affected me inside.